The moment I saw it, I knew it was meant for me. An antique shop tucked away in the farthest corner of a street that no one seemed to walk down. There was something odd about the place, like it had been waiting for someone. For me. The necklace hung in the window, dark, intricate, and gleaming with a faint coppery sheen that seemed to pulse as I moved closer. Its centerpiece was a jagged black stone, smooth and cold, surrounded by a web of twisted silver vines. My fingers tingled the moment I touched it, as if the metal was alive, breathing beneath my fingertips. "I see it's caught your eye," a voice rasped behind me. The old man who ran the shop appeared without warning, his gray eyes watching me with a curious glint. "That piece, it's got a history." "Everything in here has history, doesn't it?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart was hammering in my chest. I felt drawn to the necklace, as if invisible strings were pulling me closer. "More than you might think," the old man murmured. "That necklace belonged to a devotee of Morrigan, the Celtic goddess of war. Death follows where she treads." The word death hung in the air like a fog, thick and suffocating. My hand tightened around the necklace. "How much?" He stared at me for a long moment before naming a price that felt too low for something so significant. I didn't question it. My body was already moving, my mind set on owning it. When I left the shop, the necklace felt heavier than it should, as if the stone was pressing into my skin, burrowing beneath it. But the weight was comforting in a way I couldn't explain. It felt right. That night I put it on. The chain slid across my neck like ice, the cold metal kissing my skin as I fastened the clasp. For a moment, nothing happened. I stared at myself in the mirror, the necklace gleaming under the dim light. It suited me far more than I expected. There was an eerie elegance to it, as though it had always belonged to me. But then the light flickered. Just once. Twice. The room plunged into darkness, and that's when the visions began. At first it was just flashes, images of blood, of screams, of ancient warriors locked in battle, their eyes wild with madness. I saw swords cleaving through flesh, the ground stained red beneath their feet. And in the center of it all, a woman. Her hair was as black as night, her eyes hollow and cruel. She stood tall, wielding a spear, commanding the chaos around her with a voice like thunder. "Morrigan," I gasped, wrenching the necklace from my neck, my breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. The room was still again, the visions gone. But I knew they weren't gone for good. The next day, I tried to push the memories away, convincing myself it was a dream. Stress. Lack of sleep. I told myself anything to make it seem normal. But the necklace, it called to me, whispered in the back of my mind, gnawing at my thoughts until I couldn't resist. I put it on again. The visions returned, stronger this time, more vivid. I was standing in the middle of a battlefield, the screams of the dying all around me. Their bodies littered the ground, limbs twisted and broken, faces frozen in agony. My hands, God, my hands, they were covered in blood. I looked down to see the knife, heavy in my grip, dripping with crimson. This wasn't a vision anymore. This was me. I ripped the necklace from my neck and threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a sickening thud, the black stone cracking against the plaster. But no matter how far I tried to distance myself, I could feel it. Its presence lingered, seeping into my bones. And then came the rage. It started small. A simmering irritation at the most trivial things, a misplaced item, a comment from a stranger. But soon it grew. I could feel the violence bubbling beneath my skin, desperate to break free. I found myself standing over my neighbor's cat, the same one that always scratched at my flowers, with a rock in my hand. I didn't remember picking it up. Didn't remember walking outside. But there I was, my heart pounding, my fingers twitching, wanting to crush it. That night, I dreamt of her again. Morrigan. She stood over me, her eyes like twin voids, and whispered in a language I didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. There was no escaping her. The next morning, I woke to find the necklace lying on my pillow, as though it had crawled its way back to me. I put it on. The visions were constant now. The blood, the death, the endless war. But it wasn't just in my mind anymore. It followed me into the real world. I could hear the clashing of swords in the distance when I walked down the street, the smell of coppery blood in the air when I sat in my apartment. And the rage was consuming me. I lashed out at a friend who had done nothing but offer a kind word. My hands shook with the need to hurt, to destroy. And that's when I realized Morrigan wasn't showing me visions. She was changing me. Piece by piece, I was becoming something else. Something violent. Something dark. Something hers. I knew now that I had to confront her. Break the curse before it consumed me completely. But even as I made this decision, the necklace pulsed against my skin, tightening around my throat as if to remind me that it belongs to her. And soon so will I. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, she was there. Morrigan, watching me from the shadows, her face shrouded in darkness, lips twisted into a knowing smile. It felt like she was just waiting for me to break, to fully surrender, but I wasn't ready to give up. Morning came, though the light felt hollow. The sun was out, but it didn't warm me. The air was heavy with the same suffocating weight that had settled in my bones since the necklace first wrapped itself around my throat. I kept telling myself I could stop this. I just had to find a way to fight her. I couldn't wear it anymore. That much was clear. It was the only thought I clung to as I grabbed the necklace from my dresser, gripping it tightly in my hand. I was going to destroy it. I had to. I headed for the shed behind my apartment complex, a rusty old shack where tenants kept their tools. The air felt colder as I approached, the wind biting at my skin even though it was supposed to be summer. My hands shook as I grabbed the hammer. I'd smash the damn thing into pieces. End it once and for all. I laid the necklace on the cold concrete floor, its black stone staring up at me like a watchful eye. My hand trembled as I raised the hammer high. I brought it down. The moment the hammer connected, the necklace let out a screech, an inhuman, ear-piercing wail that echoed through the air, forcing me to stumble back. The sound rattled my bones, and for a second I swore I heard voices, whispering, chanting in some forgotten language. My heart pounded as I stared down at the necklace. Not a scratch. Not even a crack in the stone. In the corner of the shed, something shifted. I froze, breath catching in my throat. The shadows, once still, seemed to ripple and churn as though alive. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, when a figure began to emerge. My body tensed, fear gripping me as I realized this wasn't just some trick of the light. The shape took form, a woman. Her eyes burned with a cold, ancient rage, lips pale and bloodless, hair matted and slicked with dark stains. She stood unnaturally still, too still, and as her gaze locked onto mine, I felt that same primal urge to run. But I couldn't move. It was Morrigan. I didn't need to ask. I knew it was her, just as I knew she wasn't part of the visions anymore. She was real. Here. Now? Her voice came, low and whispery, the words curling around me like a noose. You think you can break what belongs to me? I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. My pulse thundered in my ears, but still I couldn't move, couldn't speak. She stepped forward, her feet soundless against the floor, her gaze never leaving mine. You took the necklace, little one. You wear it. You are mine. I staggered back, dropping the hammer with a clang that seemed to echo endlessly in the small space. My skin crawled with the weight of her presence, a suffocating pressure that pushed against my chest. The air grew thick with the smell of blood, metallic and sharp, so strong I could taste it on my tongue. I don't want it, I finally managed to choke out, voice hoarse. Take it back, I don't want any of this. Her smile widened, revealing teeth too sharp for any human mouth. It's far too late for that. Before I could react, she lunged. No movement, no warning, just darkness closing the distance between us in a split second. Her hand shot out and wrapped around my throat, cold fingers digging into my skin like talons. The room spun, my vision blurring as I gasped for air, my hands clawing at hers in a desperate attempt to free myself. Then just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The grip vanished, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping and trembling, my vision returning in spots of white. I looked up, expecting to see her standing over me, but she was gone. The shed was empty, save for the faint, lingering scent of decay. My body shook as I struggled to stand, the necklace lying just inches away from me, untouched, unharmed. My breath came in short, ragged bursts as I reached for it. My fingers grazed the cold stone, and suddenly everything went black. When I woke, I was in my apartment, sprawled out on the floor like a rag doll. How had I gotten here? My head throbbed with the memory of Morrigan, her voice still ringing in my ears. I tried to shake the feeling off, but it clung to me like a second skin. And then I saw the blood. My hand flew to my throat, expecting to find deep gashes where her nails had cut into me, but my skin was smooth, perfectly untouched. No, the blood wasn't mine. It trailed from the door, thick drops of crimson leading to the hallway outside. My heart pounded in my chest, panic rising like bile. Slowly I moved toward the door, my breath hitching in my throat with each step. The hallway was silent, too silent, as if the world had been muted. The blood trail continued, leading down the hall, out the building. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn back, but I couldn't. My feet kept moving, dragging me along with them as if they weren't my own. The trail led me to the alley behind the complex. And there, crumpled against the wall, was my neighbor. His body was twisted, broken in ways that didn't make sense. His face, God, his face, was frozen in a mask of pure terror, his eyes wide and glassy, blood pouring from his mouth, nose, everywhere. And there, around his neck, was the necklace. I stared, horror rooting me to the spot, unable to look away from the necklace that now lay against his cold skin. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then his eyes snapped to mine, and he smiled. The world seemed to tilt as I stood frozen in that alleyway, my neighbor's lifeless body sprawled against the wall. His eyes, they were locked on me, hollow and glassy, but that smile, it wasn't his. It couldn't be his. It was the same chilling, knowing grin I'd seen on Morrigan's face. I staggered back, my legs weak beneath me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. The necklace, heavy and sinister, gleamed against his pale skin, the black stone seeming to pulse with a heartbeat of its own. It was mocking me, daring me to take it back. "Stop! Stop this!" I whispered, though I didn't know who I was pleading with. Morrigan, the necklace, or the part of me that had somehow let this happen. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, spiraling out of control, the image of my neighbor's twisted smile seared into my mind. Then his body jerked. I stumbled back with a strangled gasp, my heart slamming against my ribs. His head tilted to the side with a sickening crack, his dead eyes still on me, that grotesque grin spreading wider. Too wide. The bones in his face seemed to stretch unnaturally, his lips pulling back to reveal teeth stained with blood. A sound escaped him, low and gurgling at first, but it grew. A laugh. A wet, rasping laugh that echoed through the narrow alley like nails on glass. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as the blood around him started to move, thick rivulets crawling across the ground toward me, like veins pulsing with dark intent. No, I muttered, stepping back again, but I couldn't move fast enough. The blood snaked its way toward my feet, and I could feel the cold, sticky wetness brushing against my shoes. Then the laughter stopped. The air grew unnaturally still, and in the silence that followed, I heard it. A whisper. Faint at first, but unmistakable, weaving its way through the quiet. "She's coming." My neighbor's head snapped up suddenly, his dead grin now twisted with something else, something darker, more malevolent. His body began to twitch and convulse violently, the sound of his bones grinding against one another, filling the air. And then he stood. His limbs cracked and contorted as if he were a puppet on broken strings, but he moved toward me, slowly, deliberately, the necklace gleaming under the dim alley light. My breath hitched as he took another step and then another until he was just inches away. "You belong to her now," he rasped, his voice no longer his own. It was a chorus of voices, layered, ancient, and all too familiar. Morrigan. She was speaking through him, her cold breath on the back of my neck, her presence wrapping around me like a noose. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot, the air thick and heavy with her power. He raised a hand, pale, blood-stained fingers stretching toward me. My skin crawled as they brushed against my arm, cold as death, leaving smears of blood in their wake. Then, without warning, the necklace around his neck snapped. The chain broke with a sharp metallic clink, the black stone tumbling to the ground with a hollow thud. And with that, my neighbor collapsed in a heap, his body crumpling like a rag doll, lifeless once again. For a moment, all was silent, but the peace didn't last. The black stone began to pulse again, brighter this time, the shadows around me growing thicker, more oppressive. I could feel it, her closing in on me. The whispers started again, louder now, more insistent. "Take it, take the necklace." My hand moved on its own, reaching down toward the stone. I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. But I couldn't stop myself. My fingers brushed the cold surface, and a jolt of icy pain shot through me, as if I had touched the edge of death itself. I heard her laugh. The moment my fingers curled around the necklace, the world shifted. Suddenly, I was no longer in the alley. I was standing in the middle of a battlefield, the sky dark and roiling with storm clouds, the scent of blood and smoke thick in the air. Around me, bodies lay strewn across the ground, their eyes wide and glassy, much like my neighbors had been. The sound of clashing swords rang out in the distance, mixed with the screams of the dying. I looked down at myself, my hands were soaked in blood, my clothes torn and ragged, and in my hand I still held the necklace. But it wasn't just a necklace anymore. It had grown, twisting and writhing like a living thing, the silver vines coiling around my wrist, up my arm, digging into my skin. I could feel it sinking deeper, burrowing beneath my flesh, binding itself to me. And then she appeared, Morrigan. She stood before me, taller than before, her hair wild and matted with blood, her eyes gleaming with a cruel, ancient power. Her smile was as cold and sharp as a blade. "You cannot escape me," she whispered, stepping closer, her voice a low hiss. "The necklace binds you to me, little one. You are mine." I tried to speak, to scream, but no sound came. The world around me darkened, the battlefield fading into shadows, until all that remained was her. She reached out, her hand brushing my cheek, her touch as cold as death itself. "You will do as I command," she said, her voice a venomous promise. "You will bring war, you will bring death, and soon you will beg for my mercy." Then everything went black. I woke up in my apartment again, my heart pounding, the necklace lying on the floor beside me, gleaming in the dim light of dawn. But this time there was no escape, because I wasn't alone. There was a shadow in the corner, watching, waiting, and this time it smiled. The weight of the necklace had never been heavier. It clung to my neck like a collar, the black stone pressing into my skin as if it had fused with me. Morrigan's whispers no longer came from outside. They were inside me now, a constant low murmur that echoed in the back of my mind. I could feel her presence in every heartbeat, every breath. I was no longer just haunted, I was possessed. For days, I tried to fight her influence. I locked myself in my apartment, refusing to go outside, afraid of what I might do. But the world outside didn't stay quiet. There were whispers from my neighbors about the man who had disappeared, about the blood they'd seen in the alley. The police came, knocking on my door, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was afraid they'd see what I had become. The visions never stopped. They followed me wherever I went, awake or asleep. I saw blood, endless rivers of it, bodies piling up in battlefields that stretched beyond the horizon. And always Morrigan was there, watching, waiting for me to break. She knew I couldn't hold out much longer. On the third night, I woke to the sound of chanting. My room was dark, the air thick with the smell of burning incense, though no candles were lit. I sat up, my heart pounding, but I wasn't alone. The shadow, her shadow, stood at the foot of my bed. "You can't escape," her voice hissed, low and menacing, like the crackle of distant thunder. "You never could. You belong to me." I clutched the necklace, the stone cold beneath my fingers, but I didn't pull it off. I knew now that there was no escape from her. No running. No hiding. I had to confront her. It was time. The whispers grew louder as I stood, my body moving almost on its own as I left the apartment. I walked through the silent streets, the shadows twisting and writhing around me, as if they were alive. Morrigan's presence filled the air, thick and suffocating, guiding me toward a place I had never been, but somehow knew I needed to go. I found myself standing before an old, crumbling church on the outskirts of town. Its doors were ajar, the faint glow of candles flickering from within. The air was cold, biting at my skin, but I barely noticed. The necklace pulsed against my chest, urging me forward. Inside, the church was hollow and empty, save for a single altar at the far end. Ancient symbols were etched into the walls, their meaning lost to time, but I understood them. They were her symbols, Morrigan's, the goddess of war, the bringer of death, and I was about to meet her. As I approached the altar, the chanting grew louder. I could hear it now, clear and sharp, as if 1,000 voices were echoing in the rafters above me, calling my name. My body trembled, but I kept moving forward, the pull of the necklace growing stronger with every step. And then I saw her. Morrigan stood before the altar, tall and imposing, her dark hair cascading down her back like a river of shadows. Her eyes were hollow, gleaming with an ancient power, and her lips curled into a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. In her hand, she held a long black blade, its edge glistening with fresh blood. "Welcome," she whispered, her voice a soft hiss that filled the empty space. "You are ready." My throat tightened, and I tried to speak, but no words came. My legs felt like they were made of lead, my heart hammering in my chest. "I've waited for this moment," she continued, stepping closer, her presence suffocating. "You have fought long enough, but now the time has come to fulfill your destiny." I shook my head, backing away, but the necklace burned against my skin, holding me in place. I couldn't run. I couldn't escape. "I'm not yours," I managed to choke out, though the words felt hollow, desperate. She smiled, stepping closer until she was inches away. "You have always been mine. From the moment you touched the necklace, you became part of my world. You are a vessel, a bringer of war, a servant of death." Her hand reached out, brushing against my cheek, cold and electric. "You will wear the necklace forever, and through you, I will spread chaos and death to the world. You will see blood on every street, feel the earth tremble beneath the weight of the dead." I tried to pull away, but her grip was iron, her touch spreading through my skin like ice. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, the voices echoing in my head until I thought I might go mad. "No," I whispered, my vision blurring as I sank to my knees. "No, please," but Morrigan only laughed. And then everything went silent. The church, the chanting, even Morrigan herself, all of it vanished in an instant, leaving me alone in the darkness. Except I wasn't alone. I felt the cold weight of the necklace around my neck, heavier than before, and when I looked down, I saw my reflection in the polished stone. But it wasn't me staring back. It was her. Her eyes, dark, cruel, and endless, stared back at me from the reflection, the corners of her mouth twisting into a smile that I had seen too many times. My heart froze in my chest as I realized what had happened. I wasn't me anymore. Morrigan had taken me, fully, completely. I was gone, and in my place she lived. The last thing I felt before the darkness swallowed me whole was a cold, creeping sense of satisfaction. Not my own, but hers. And somewhere, far away, I heard her voice one last time, soft and venomous. You were always mine.